Hi, Professor Recap here. Today I'm going to explain a sci-fi thriller show called Person of Interest. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The show opens as we see a bearded homeless man named Reese sitting alone in a metro. Moments later, a group of young men appear and begin bullying him for no reason. But the homeless man suddenly stands up and starts beating them up. The guys do their best to defend themselves, but Reese easily overpowers them, revealing that he's a trained professional. Soon enough, the cops arrive at the scene and arrest them all. At the police station, an officer named Carter examines surveillance footage from the metro and is impressed by the homeless man's skill. He knows Bumfu. She then approaches Reese and asks if he was ever in the military, but the man doesn't respond clearly. Despite forgiving to provide any information, Reese is eventually released. However, it turns out that Carter has managed to get his fingerprints from a plastic cup. When she takes them to the forensic team, they're shocked to learn that Reese is a wanted man linked to several crimes around the world. However, by this point, Reese has already left the station and is greeted by a pair of suited men. They claim that their employer wishes to meet with him and take him away from there. The following morning, Reese is taken to meet a tech billionaire named Finch, who has been waiting for him. Finch addresses Reese by name and admits that he knows everything about the man. Reese doubts his claims, so Finch states that he knows about his past work in the CIA and how the government believes he is dead. He's also aware that Reese has lost someone close to him and is now trying to drink himself to death. Upon hearing all of this, our protagonist is shocked and asks the billionaire what he wants. Finch then takes him to the center of New York City and explains that somebody dies every 18 hours in New York, but they can stop him. He reveals that he has a special list of people who are about to be involved in very bad situations. Finch then points out a young woman buying coffee, revealing that she is a prosecutor named Diane Hansen. He explains that this week she's about to get involved in something dangerous and asks Reese to take care of it. But he also adds that he's unsure whether she is a victim or a perpetrator. However, Reese doesn't believe in any of this and thinks Diane must be Finch's ex-girlfriend or wife. The billionaire then offers him a salary of a hefty amount for the job, but Reese rejects it and departs. That night, he checks into a motel where he shaves and puts on clean clothes. He then watches the news about the police searching for him and starts drinking alcohol until he falls asleep. The next morning, Reese wakes up in a fancier hotel room with his hands tied to the bed. He suddenly hears a woman screaming, so he breaks his ties and rushes towards the sound. However, he is shocked to find that it is just a recorder and sees Finch in front of him. The billionaire reveals that the scream he heard came from a woman who died in the same room 3 years prior. He tells Reese that he's too late to save that woman, but he can save Diane, who is still alive. Finch then promises that he will never lie to him as the government did and asks for his trust. In the end, Reese is convinced by the man's words and agrees to work for him, even though he kidnapped him and used his emotions against him. This makes Finch very pleased, so he takes Reese to his secret office. There, he has a list of social security numbers, each of which is linked to a violent crime. Reese wants to know where the numbers come from, but the billionaire refuses to reveal this. Regardless, the two start planning how they will monitor. It seems like the script is written in English. Here is the passage as provided. Diane, and learn more about the situation. Later, Reese breaks into her house while she's not present and taps her home and all of her devices. The duo suspects she is a victim in the situation, since she's a highly successful prosecutor with many enemies. Following a thorough investigation, Reese narrows the list of suspects who may be targeting Diane to 2 men. One is her co-counselor and ex-lover, Wheeler, and the other is Lawrence Pope, whom she is currently prosecuting. It turns out that Pope is accused of shooting his drug dealer friends and stealing their money. One evening, Diane visits Pope alone in his cell, and Reese overhears their conversation. It turns out that she has now started doubting the case and thinks Pope is innocent. Diane asks if he is protecting his younger brother, Michael, who had witnessed the real killers. However, Pope admits that he had killed those people and is willing to serve his sentence. When Diane continues to question him, he becomes enraged and begins strangling her, prompting the guard to intervene. Following this incident, Diane begins desperately looking for Michael to bring the real perpetrator to account. While keeping an eye on her, Reese notices Wheeler attempting to get closer to her and showing interest in Pope's case. At one point, he even notices Wheeler sneaking into her office and looking for something on her computer. This makes Reese and Finch suspect that the man is involved with the killers and is trying to protect them. Meanwhile, Reese keeps asking Finch where he got this information, and eventually the billionaire agrees to reveal it. That didn't take long. He explains that after 9/11, the government started monitoring emails, phone calls, and other communications to track terrorists. Therefore, Finch, a software engineer, created a computer program that can sift through massive amounts of data, looking for patterns of activity that might predict another attack. The machine divided crimes into two categories: possible terrorist attacks and other minor crimes. The government was unconcerned about the minor murders, so they were ordered removed from the system. However, Finch can still gain access to this list through a system backdoor. After some thorough investigation into Diane's case, Reese discovers that the people involved in the murder are actually cops. Things get worse when he discovers that Pope has been stabbed to death in his cell. As a result, Reese begins to monitor these cops and follows them around. One day, he overhears Diane receiving a call from a cop named Stills, who asks to meet. Reese assumes she is about to be killed, so he decides to intervene and help her. However, when he arrives at the location, he is shocked to discover it is Diane, who has been plotting with the killers. She is also responsible for Pope's death and scolds the corrupt cops for failing to find and kill Michael. Diane reveals how Wheeler has started to get suspicious of her and orders Stills to get rid of him tonight. That evening, Stills and his henchmen arrive at Wheeler's apartment just as he is about to leave with his young son. The corrupt cops are ready to shoot him, but fortunately, Reese shows up at the right moment and points a gun at one of them. He orders them to retreat, and while the other officers flee, Stills refuses to leave. A gunfight then ensues between the two men, but Reese eventually gains the upper hand and manages to kill Stills. The next day, we see Diane in the courtroom with Wheeler and the rest of the good investigators. She plays what she considers to be an important evidence audio take. However, Reese has switched the tapes, and the entire court hears Diane admitting her role in Pope's death and ordering her men to murder Wheeler. Everyone in the court is filled with shock, and Diane realizes she's screwed with no way out. On the other hand, Reese is contacted by Finch, who wants to tell him about their next mission. The two men visit a cemetery where Finch shows Reese the grave of a 15-year-old girl named Teresa Whitaker. He reveals that the girl and her family went on a hunting trip 2 years ago. During the trip, her father, Grant, murdered her mother and brother before taking his own life, allegedly due to financial problems. However, the strange thing is that the police never found Teresa's body, and her coffin is also empty. Finch then reveals that his machine has detected the girl's social security number, indicating that she is still alive and in danger. Upon hearing this, Reese immediately gets to work and begins investigating the young girl. On the other hand, Finch goes to meet Elizabeth, who is Teresa's uncle's wife. He introduces himself as an insurance agent, and Elizabeth reveals that she has divorced her husband, Derek. She talks about how he couldn't get over his brother's death, and his personality changed drastically after that. Elizabeth also speaks fondly of Teresa, revealing how she used to love the girl like her own daughter and misses her dearly. In the meantime, Reese approaches a young boy who was once Teresa's close friend. He inquires about her, but the enraged boy asks if it is a joke, since Teresa has been dead for 2 years. However, before the boy can leave, Reese secretly takes his phone and force pairs it with his own. Moments later, he notices the boy sending a message to Teresa asking her to run away. Reese then looks around and notices the girl nearby. He chases her down and grabs her, but she fights back fiercely and slices his hand with a knife before fleeing. Later, Reese meets with Finch and provides an update on the case. The duo also discovers that Grant didn't kill himself. but was murdered by a hitman named Sonic. He could have picked any name. With this information, Reese visits Sonic, who is currently in jail for a different case. Reese asks why he spared Teresa, and the man reveals that he doesn't kill kids, no matter how much money is offered. He simply left her with the warning that if she told anyone about him, he would return to kill her. When Reese asks who hired him, Sonic admits that he only met the client once, was paid in cash, and no names were exchanged. In the evening, Finch informs Reese that after digging into Grant's finances, he has uncovered a new clue. It turns out that shortly before his death, Grant invested in a piece of land with a man named Calhoun, who owns a real estate company called Landale. They suspect that Calhoun has something to do with the situation and decide to keep a close eye on him. The next day, Reese manages to track Teresa down at a laundromat. However, just when he tries to speak to her, a hitman appears and attempts to kill her. Reese fights the hitman easily and injures him before escaping the place with Teresa. He then takes her to a hotel room and assures her she'll be safe there. The girl is initially reluctant to trust this strange man, but since he just saved her life, she decides to stay. Reese then asks if she knows anything about the people who killed her family. While Teresa doesn't have much information, she claims that it's all because of her uncle Derek. At this point, Finch arrives in the room, so Reese leaves the girl in his care and heads out to continue his investigation. Later, Reese arrives outside Landale's headquarters to keep an eye on Calhoun, but unexpectedly discovers Derek there. He immediately confronts the man and demands to know his involvement in his brother's death. This surprisingly scares Derek, and he starts crying like a kid. He then reveals that Grant had purchased a piece of land that was previously devalued due to an oil spill. He collaborated with Calhoun on the project, and when the deal failed, Calhoun ordered the murder of Grant and his entire family. Understood. Let's proceed with the script. However, the land has since been cleaned up and is now worth 40 to 50 times more than its original value. Derek admits that Calhoun spared him only to sign over the assets, as he was the last living family member until now. It turns out that Teresa is the rightful heir to the property. That's why they are determined to kill her, ensuring that she can't claim the fortune. Back at the hotel, Finch tries to convince Teresa to move in with her Aunt Elizabeth. The hitman won't be looking for her there. He tells her how emotional Elizabeth was when talking about Teresa and how much she seems to love her. The girl thinks about it for a moment before calling her aunt. However, when Elizabeth answers the phone, Teresa remains silent and simply hangs up. Unfortunately for her, the hitman pursuing her had wiretapped Elizabeth's phone, so he now has Teresa's location. Elsewhere, Calhoun is in his car when he receives a message from his hitman claiming that he had found the girl and is about to kill her. But as he reads the message, a massive truck collides with his car and flips it over. It turns out to be Reese, who quickly pulls Calhoun from the wreckage and orders him to call off the hit on Teresa. However, the corrupt businessman informs him that it's too late now, as the hitman is already on his way. Back at the hotel, the hitman cuts the camera cables in the elevator and begins his hunt, while Finch and Teresa hide inside their room. The man grabs a fire hose and disables each camera one by one as he moves toward them. Realizing they're running out of time, the two flee through the hallways and search for an escape route. However, after a long, nerve-wracking chase, the hitman finally corners them on the staircase. Finch urges Teresa to run and save herself, but she refuses to leave him behind. However, just as the hitman is about to pull the trigger, Reese bursts onto the scene and shoots him multiple times, finally killing him for good. In the aftermath of this incident, Calhoun is arrested, as all the proof of his murder and dirty work is sent to the police by our heroes. Reese then contacts Detective Carter and arranges a meeting, so she also arrives at the location with her team. But to her shock, there is no sign of Reese. Instead, he has left Teresa there to be picked up. Later, at the police station, Carter sits with the girl and asks about the identity of the people who saved her. However, Teresa claims that she's still traumatized by what happened and can't remember clearly. The episode then ends as Elizabeth arrives at the station and shares an emotional reunion with her niece. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.